There we go. I think we're all live right now.
After 100 years, we need to check that every once in a
That's
while.
right. You need to go, is this thing really on? Anybody out there? Hi, I'm Doug Wright, and I'm here with some beloved colleagues at KSL Radio. And this morning, we thought we'd just have a fun and kind of informal chat about our love for KSL Radio and the 100 years, and maybe some of the things that have happened to us while we have been participating in those 100 years. Now, let's go around, because first I'm going to throw it to my friend and colleague for a long, long time now, Amanda Dickson. And Amanda,
Sure.
I have been here for 44% of KSL's 100 years. How about you?
I have been here for 32% of KSL's 100 years. How about you, Tim?
And Tim,
I've had a couple of tours of duty with a little break in between, but all combined, almost 30% of all of those years.
Isn't that just crazy to think about?
It is.
Yeah. When I was hired at KSL, I will never forget, I was really intimidated. And like you, Tim, I came from a music background. I worked at KCPX. When you came over to KSL, you were at KSOP. And I was used to playing the hits. It was all about the entertainment and the ratings and everything else and just kind of having fun. But oh my goodness, I walked through the doors over there on Social Hall Avenue, and it was like, whoa, I'm out of my league. I am out of my depth. And I was intimidated. Tim, for you, when you started at KSL, what was it like to walk through the doors?
You plucked me from obscurity, actually, in 1988. And you mentioned I worked at KSOP. We were the second link in the emergency broadcast system chain. Right. So we had to have a direct line to KSL all the time. And I was working afternoon drive at the time. And I was such a fan of Mark Van Wagner and Danny Kramer and Maury Carlson and you and, so many. I would listen in queue while I was segueing records. And I remember listening to KSL doing some things that were just unbelievable. The relationship with Delta Airlines through the years, and you remember Fred Rollins, both of you, I'm sure. But we did great promotions with Delta Airlines at the time, and I'm sitting over there playing records, and occasionally would get to go to a country music concert, which we thought was a pretty big deal. But KSL was taking Delta jets full of listeners to Disney World for broadcasts that lasted all day long. Yep. They were broadcasting from, and I'm sure you remember this one, the grand opening of Wasatch Mountain State Park, and Mark had Doug Miller sitting around the campfire first thing in the morning. Jim Braden was out with a backpack on a jet ski, and I'm segueing tunes thinking, I want to go do this.
Yeah.
And so in 1988, I got the chance to come over just for weekends that then turned into a morning drive opportunity. And Amanda, I know you had the same thing. You were hired originally to come here for the weekend. And I think I actually trained you on the board here the first time.
You did. Yeah, I got hired to do weekends in 1990. And Tim, Doug, and you probably remember this, trained me on the board. So I the first time I saw our broadcast board, I thought, I am not a pilot. I saw all of these sliders, and each one could go to 20 different places, including Disneyland. You bring that up, but also all of these different places all over the country. And Tim, I took copious notes of every single thing that every button could do. And I was just shaking. I was so frightened of touching that board. And back then, the commercials were on these carts that looked like 8-track tape, and you'd stack them up, and then you'd try and carry them over and not spill them, and then they could come crashing down. And so many things were on reel-to-reels back then, which if something went wrong during an interview, you'd have to grease pencil it and splice it together. But I can remember doing many interviews, and I'd make a mistake and think, I'm going to have to cut that up and try and get the sound just right to cut it. But Tim taught me how to run the board back then, and I thought, Tim, I thought then, and I think now that you're just the most incredible guy ever.
It amazes me that you two thought of a pilot immediately, because my very first night, I was nervous as a cat, and I get thrown on the air for the weekend, and I'm looking at this board, the same thing, and I said, look, And I just opened the mic and was honest with the listeners. I said, it's not like I don't have my pilot's license, but for the last 10 years, I've flown nothing but a Piper Cub, and they just put me behind the controls of a 747. And Jack Adamson, who was here at the time, Doug, and both of you will remember the name, he called me into his office and he said, that first night when you were on the air and you mentioned that you had your pilot's license, but you had just got put behind the controls of a 747, made me realize you were the guy. So,
yeah. You know, it's interesting because we've all had experiences being put behind that big, massive board and just surrounded by all kinds of equipment. And now, of course, mostly computerized. But we had one employee, you'll all remember her. Her name was Weena. I'm not kidding you. I thought she was going to pass out when I put her in front of that board. And finally, I went over and got news copy and covered everything that you usually didn't use, and kind of got it down to the point where, you know, this is what you use on every show, every day. And it's not quite as bad as it looks. And even then I thought she was going to pass out on me. I'm interested to hear from you guys, and maybe I'll kick this off because you mentioned something, Tim, that I haven't talked about for a while. But, you know, these spectacular remote broadcasts that we used to do, we used to have our free ski night up at Park City. And oh my goodness, I remember, you know, Doug Miller used to have this backpack that he would wear along the sidelines of the BYU broadcast. It weighed a ton. And then you had a big battery pack that you wore around your waist. And you had a little box that just sat right below your rib cage on your belt that you would control volumes with. And you had your headset microphone. You also had a guest microphone. And I decided to be really, really cool. And antennas are sticking up and the whole thing. I thought it'd be really cool if I skied down Payday live. So I got the brilliant idea of using the guest mic because, you know, the headset was fine. And this thing weighs a ton. And I thought, well, if I put the guest mic down between the skis, this is going to sound really cool.
What could go wrong?
And it did for a while until I was so busy worrying about running over the microphone that I caught an edge live on the edge and just went. And that's when you really have to watch your language. That's when you really have to suppress some natural instincts of, you know, it's like out of a Christmas story. And that was and I actually broke ribs and everything, but I skied on down, and it was painful. I'll put it that way. Hey, I just noticed our colleague.
Hi, Maria.
Maria Shilaos. I got to brag on Maria.
Challenged, apparently. Sorry.
I was thinking about this the other day. You know, the longest running show on KSL NewsRadio is obviously the Tabernacle Choir broadcast. It's been on the air forever. And Richard L. Evans hosted that for 41 years. Longest running, I think, host on a particular show. But I'll tell you, Maria Shilaos is at the helm of, I think, the second longest running show on KSL, and that's the KSL Greenhouse. Now, the movie show, I think, does come in third, but, you know, I don't mind being behind Maria any day of the week. Maria, welcome.
Such a great show, and thank you so much for having me. And sorry that I'm a little StreamYard challenged.
Hey, we all are. And Tim, you've hosted the Greenhouse and everything else in the past. We've all had multiple duties, haven't we, Amanda?
Yes, for sure. And we were just sharing, Maria, you know, favorite moments or moments that stand out. And I have to, the one that came to my mind as you were telling that one about the skis, Doug, is that Grant and I, one year, we were doing it was the pre-Stadium of Fire. You know how we always used to host the Stadium of Fire? And the pre-show to the Stadium of Fire, one year they had an elephant. And they put Grant and me on an elephant to ride the length of the football field to the stage. And they gave us microphones to talk on the air while we're riding the elephant down the field. And so Grant gets up on the elephant, no problem. And then they just sort of threw me up in front of him. Well, I kicked him in a very painful place while I was mounting the elephant in front of him. And as we're riding down, this elephant, from the second I got on that elephant, it took off. I mean, it wasn't just a dum walk down it was, yeah. And I said to Grant, we're going to die on top of it. This elephant's going to throw us. And the obituary is going to say, you're like Grant and Amanda, who died riding an elephant at Stadium of Fire. And then it's going to say something stupid like they died doing what they loved.
That's right. How many of you have been on an elephant? Tim,
Oh, no, not an elephant.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
Maria, have you been on an elephant?
Horse is as far as I can go.
They
No.
are bristly. I mean, if you're not wearing Levi's, sitting on the back of an elephant
hurts, uncomfortable.
hurts. What's a favorite story of yours, Tim?
Oh, it's funny that Amanda brought up Stadium of Fire, because one of mine, I was going through scrapbooks yesterday because we've all been pulling pictures and putting them on social media. Stadium of Fire, I think it was 1991, and we were doing a broadcast there, which we did every year. But I was scheduled to be on stage with Alan Osman. And Alan had this great idea that we would have a new world record for the most. You remember this? You're smiling, Doug. We would set a world record for 1 million firecrackers being lit simultaneously.
Yeah.
Now they brought out the entire Provo police or fire department, which had us all concerned on stage to begin with. But what made this more dramatic was Alan decided to, I think, have a coloring contest through Smith's. And so they had a winning child who was up on the stage with us. The firecrackers were draped behind the stage, a good 20, 30 yards. And this little guy was to come up there. We'd introduce him. He would push a plunger and they would light the firecrackers. Nobody knew what to expect. It went off like an atomic bomb. And it wasn't like pop, 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 pop. It was just this big fireball. And the heat was so bad that this child's parents grabbed him and got off the front of the stage. We made a quick trip to the front of the stage, but we laugh about it now, but it was scary at the moment.
It was incredible. It was a curtain of fire and smoke. And we were clear down in the north end zone because we were doing a live broadcast that night. Only KSL would broadcast fireworks. What can you say? But a wave of heat just came through right down the yardage and just hit us in the face. I understand our friend Dick Norris, he actually got singed, his eyebrows.
I had a full head of hair before.
That's what happened. We were all wondering. Maria, how about you?
Okay, I have to tell you about the year that Rod Arquette and I hosted the rodeo across the street here. And we were out there. We were supposed to do kind of a relay thing. It was kind of a race with other DJs from other stations. And so he says, I'm going to get on the horse and you'll pick it up after that. So he gets on the horse and gets thrown off the horse.
Ooh.
And that actually, he was fine, but it made the TV news because he actually fell off of this horse.
Yeah.
Just what can go wrong? Right?
Right?
Elephants and radio personalities. What could possibly happen? Oh, and fireworks, right?
Yeah. We've all had close calls on the air where you almost, but one of the funniest, and I love telling this story because I can rat out my friend Lee Lonsbury, who now, of course, is with Senator Lee's office, but he was my producer for a long time and he was just terrific. He was on the air on KSL for a while. He was also with Rob Bishop, but when he was producing for me, it was during the government shutdown of 2014. And I was ticked off about it. I thought, what this is going to do to our little communities, getting checks out to people that need them. And I was up in arms. I said, let's call to the little communities at the mouths of all of the national parks because they're going to be shut down. So let's call Tori and let's call down to our friends at Ruby's Inn. And let's make sure you get Springdale and let's get the mayor on. And so he was diligent. He's calling around and he goes, hey, I got the mayor of Springdale. That'll kick off the show. And he said, but when I talked to them about the closing of the parks, they didn't seem all that concerned. And, but the mayor's going to join us. I said, oh, that's fine. I'm sure they're just being a little reserved. So anyway, we were minutes at most away from going on the air with the mayor of Springdale, Arkansas. I'm not kidding you.
Minor detail.
That close. And this poor mayor was just clueless, and he didn't know. And I'm glad that one didn't make it on the air. Anybody else have a close call out there?
You guys want to go or do you want me to go?
Go ahead, Amanda.
Go, Amanda.
Okay. The thing that comes to my mind, it wasn't really a close call, but it was, okay. And this is another Grant and Amanda story. Forgive me, Tim, but after two decades, I have so many stories.
There's 30 years of those.
Yeah. So, as you know, Grant would crack me up on a regular basis. And there was one day, and there was a serious story in the news that day, which made it all the more inappropriate, that he was cracking me up during a commercial break. And we knew we had to come back to something serious. And I couldn't stop laughing, and neither could he. We were in one of those physical chain reactions where your body just won't let you stop laughing. And so he played another commercial and we're trying to get it together. And we're like digging our fingernails into the palm of our hands, trying to make ourselves stop laughing. And he finally realized, I can't play any more commercials. We've got to come back. And so we had to come back and just admit to the listener. We couldn't go to the story. We had to admit to the listener, we're so sorry, but we're just having one of those moments where life is good. And Rod Arquette said to us afterwards, that will never happen again.
Oh,
Just so we're clear, that will never happen again.
Okay, I got to take you to the other side of the spectrum, though. Remember the day of the tornado? So at that point in time, Scott Seeger and I were hosting the noon news, and this happened right after we had had the shooting at the Triad Center.
Remember.
So just imagine during that shooting, Rod and I and Mark Juke spent a couple hours under the desk in the studio, and I was really angry with him for not having left the studio and left the building. And so here the tornado comes, and our producer throws open the door. You can hear the sirens going off, and we're right in the middle of the noon news, and the tents across the street, suddenly it went from a beautiful day to the skies went black, and the tents across the street were bouncing up and down. And when she opened that door and said that there was a tornado, my first instinct, I had little kids, was just to run. And honestly, I left Scott. He was trying to figure out why the station had gone off the air for a second. And I ran down the stairs, down to the hallway. And my husband called that moment and said, I just saw the tornado, went by my building. And then I just calmly walked back upstairs and back into the noon news. And nobody knew I was missing because we were off the air for just a tad there. But I just had this instinct to just flee. I'm like, I'm not spending hours under the desk when my kids need me. And I was out of
that was the right instinct, Maria, by the way.
But I was so embarrassed. Like, I abandoned him. I've never done that before. I'm out.
Tim, we want to get your moment, but I want to piggyback for just a second. Do you remember Liz Sanders used to produce my show? Mm-hmm. She was amazing. And but she could be a little bit of a drama queen. Once in a while, And so I had a split shift at that time. I did mornings for 2 hours, afternoons for 2 hours. So I was in that back studio where our friend Vaughn is now. There are no windows. And Liz, the door flies open. Doug, there's a tornado. And I thought, sure, Liz.
Yeah.
We live in the mountains, Liz. No, really. She almost had to physically drag me out. We went over to the south windows on the second floor. There was this swirling mass going right over what then was the Delta Center. And guess what I did? I stood there in front of the window. And it was like a bug's life. It's so beautiful.
My husband said that they did too, in front of these big, huge pictures across from Temple Square. And he's like, what were we thinking?
I told my wife that, and she's from Missouri. And she goes, are you insane? And I go, yeah, okay. Tim, what do you got?
Well, I unfortunately, some of those very dramatic moments are the ones that all of us remember, and I'm sure our listeners do too. And it's in those moments that KSL is at its best. At least we hope to be at our best when everyone out there is depending on us to get the information to them so that their families can have, that power of knowledge to make the right choices for themselves. You don't have to go back 100 years for this one, but the earthquake that happened, gosh, a year and a half, 2 years ago now.
Right at the beginning of the pandemic.
March.
Yeah.
And the pandemic was going on. So I'm in studio here. Amanda is broadcasting from home, which had its own challenges for 2 years. Amanda and I weren't even in the studio together. And so the earthquake hits. I hear people because the door to the studio is open, but I particularly hear, back to the producer thing, Adam Thomas, who was producing at the time, screaming for everybody to get out of the building. Get out of the building. get out of the building. And my instinct was to stay behind the microphone and let people know what was going on for whatever information came our way. He wasn't having any of it, and I didn't have the chance from the studio to talk to Amanda. So we were forced to go out of the building and down the emergency exit, which is just a few doors down from the studio, and did all the wrong things. As much as we preach about, as much as we preach about people being prepared so you can have muscle memory and be calm, none of us were calm at that moment. I'm sorry to report. But we gathered just outside of the station. And for those that know Triad Center, it's 8 stories tall, all glass windows on the outside. So we're standing in a drop zone should any of that glass decide to break. And Adam was having, quite frankly, a panic attack. And so I was trying to calm him down. But Gustavo, who is our great engineer.
Isn't he wonderful? Yeah.
He is standing there, and I said, somebody's got to go back and go on the air, because Amanda had no way of knowing if she was even on the air from home. And so I said, I'm going back in there. Somebody's got to be at the microphone. And Adam would not go for that. And I said, no, I'm going in. Somebody's got to be on the air, and Amanda won't know what's going on. So Gustavo says, I'm going with Tim. And we made our way to the front door of the building, and there was a security guard who was there and said, no one is allowed in. Only essential personnel. And somebody from the back of the crowd said, he's essential.
Yeah.
So right. We came back in and took the airwaves, and just as we've done so many times throughout the history of this radio station, blown everything out. No format, open up the phones, let people talk, tell them what their personal experiences were during that time. And that's when the power of this radio station is really noticeable.
Right, right. Tim, I know you're going to have to leave us here in a second. We may continue on for a moment, but when I think about the greatness of KSL, and we all have favorite stories, we've all met legendary people within our halls, from broadcasting, from politics, from religion. I mean, you name it, we've met them. But the core and the guts, really, of what makes KSL what it is, it's our listeners. I'm not kidding you. Hardly a day ever went by when I wasn't blown away by a listener, either their wisdom in a phone call, a kind letter, a contribution during a cause, a little kid that showed up in the studio for quarters for Christmas, breaking a piggy bank. I saw that over and over, and I know many of you have had the same experience, but to receive a letter from somebody and they tell you that KSL, I've had this literally happen, that KSL saved their life. Mm-hmm. Feeling that they had a friend, they were in a dark moment, whatever. And, it is incredible what our listeners do, and the way they come to the aid of the community, often with KSL just being the conduit through which we can coordinate some actions and donations. I think I would be remiss if I just didn't tell everybody viewing right now on various platforms that the magic sauce with KSL, it's our listeners, no doubt about it.
Amen, amen, amen.
In fact, my favorite memories of what we do are just of those memories being out with our listeners and connecting with them, whether that be at RC Willie eating hot dogs or, at Olympics Plaza during pin trading. Just that connection with our listeners is so strong and just makes our job so fulfilling. I mean, that's what we do. We give them the best information possible, and just to be out there and connect with them just is so meaningful.
Amanda, I know you've had some real personal moments. Tim will come right to you.
Well, Amanda has one of those experiences. I think it was a cancer patient, wasn't it? Amanda,
oh, yeah. Oh, there was this woman who wrote me, Tim, this would have been 25 years ago. It was long ago when I first started doing mornings. And she wrote me a letter and said, I have cancer. I wake up in pain every day, but the only thing that gets me going is the sound of your voice. So please, if you're going to go on vacation, would you let me know? She was funny. Yeah. And that day, I started thinking of my job differently. I realized, yes, I read news. But in my mind on that day, I realized I am here for people. So I started doing something. And if you'll forgive the religious reference, I sort of had this little quiet prayer in my mind that let me be of some service this morning, not with the content of what I say. I mean, you can't go on the air and say, I love you, I love you, I love you. I mean, people, I get fired. But in my mind, let me say something that is of some comfort to some person who needs it in a way I can't identify. Because I know someone is listening who's having the worst day of their life. Maybe their mother just passed, or their spouse just left, or their child is sick, or whatever, and they happen to turn on the radio, and please let the sound of my voice let them know they're not alone.
Yeah. Well, and what they don't realize is the strength that they give back to us in our own lives every day. And call me crazy, but I kind of miss the days when we used to do the radiothon, now called the Give-a-thon, live, nonstop for how many hours, Doug? 30? I don't know.
2 full days.
Me too.
I miss those days when we were upstairs, or we were at the hospital, or wherever we were, and we would just hand the microphones off and keep the thing going live for that entire time. I don't know that I've ever been more bonded to the staff here or to the listeners than during those times when we're raising money to help the kids at primary, but also really propping each other up. Physically propping each other up, but we were so fulfilled by the experience.
And we bonded with those children too, just to be able to share their stories with everyone. It's hard to explain that experience to someone, but just to sit with a child who is suffering from cancer, who can so eloquently tell you about what they're going through as if they're a doctor, and in a way that, they're not kind of doom and gloom. Their stories are just so inspiring.
And they can even pronounce their diseases.
Right. They sound like doctors. They do.
Maria, I'm not sure. Were you here at KSL when George Lemich was the program director?
I was not.
He hired
I've been
me.
here a long time, but not that long.
Yeah, he hired me in 1978. And he could tell I was stressed out of my mind. As I've already mentioned, I felt so out of my league. And I was walking down the hallway with these legendary broadcasters, Charlie Freed, Dr. Rex Campbell, Gordon Owen, the list just goes on and on and on. And I remember once he said, when you're on the air, and we were working on Christmas programming that time. And he said, especially at Christmas, we're here for the people that are home alone on Christmas Eve. And he mentioned a really dear friend of mine down in Eureka. He said, just like her. And they're going to be truckers that are not going to make it home for Christmas. We're here for them. And that's when, and I've used this too. He said, I want you to remember that we're the biggest kind of hometown radio station in the world. And I thought, wow, and I've tried to do exactly that and envision that person. And, we've all had feedback. Don't you love it when somebody comes up to you and said, I've never met you? Because, the first thing when somebody comes up, they're all friendly and they shake your hand or say hi. And you think, how do I know this person? How do I know this person? And this happens frequently. And I'm sure it's happened to all of you. And they come up and they go, you don't know me. So don't worry about not knowing my name. But I feel like we've been friends for a long time. Isn't that one of the most touching things that
happened
you've never met before?
On the greenhouse remote.
Yeah.
And it's incredible when it does happen, because you don't really think about a specific person's face when you're talking on the radio. And it's really so wonderful to actually meet those people, talk to them, hear from them. And I think that's what's been wonderful about our text page. Wonderful and not so wonderful, I should say, because people, all sorts of stuff. But being able to connect with people and speak to them has always been so fulfilling.
Yep. How about just a final thought, Tim? I know you got to go. Sorry, Amanda, you have an appointment here in a few moments, but let's just start with maybe Maria, and then Tim, and then Amanda, and just kind of a final thought that you'd like to leave our viewers in this case and listeners with.
Yeah, we've talked about a lot of the fun stuff that we've done, but really the meaningful stuff for me is when I know that I've made a difference. And, we look back at the fires up in Summit County. I mean, those really stand out for me, where we were really telling people, who were so concerned about their homes being so near to that fire and their homes at risk. And we were giving them information about which areas were burning and were not burning. And I think those moments where we make that difference, and not only just connecting with the community, but providing them with crucial information that makes a difference in their lives, is what really makes my job so fulfilling, and makes me come back to work every single day knowing that we are helping people.
Yeah. Tim?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the one thing I'd like for anybody that may be watching this to know is that we understand, particularly over the last 3 or 4 years, that the news we're tasked with delivering every day is not, what everybody wants to hear necessarily, but in some cases it's what you need to hear. And we really work hard to strike a balance of making sure that we're sensitive about that information and know that, throughout the pandemic, throughout the situation in Ukraine, throughout some political strife, we're not just bludgeoning you with these facts, but it is important for us all to know and realize that we're in the same situation. Our challenge is we're delivering this emotional and sometimes tragic information and trying to leave our emotions on the sideline so that we can get through it. I mean, Amanda, I don't know how many times we both, but particularly you, have had to turn your microphone off and just step away for a minute and kind of wave me on. And I'm sure it was the same way, during all those years with Grant and Brian, that this stuff strikes home to us. And we're speaking not just as broadcasters, but as husbands and wives and moms and dads. And so we feel the connection that way. And as long as we keep all of that in mind, hopefully it translates to our listeners each time we go behind the microphone.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing I would add is that, my opinion is just not relevant. I want you to know that I care. Sometimes I think people get very frustrated because they'll think they want to know what political party I am or what this I am or what that I am. And I just want you to know that none of that really matters, because what matters is that I care about the information and I care about you. I want you to have what you need, and I want all of us to be able to get along and to live as healthily and happily as we can. And that doesn't require me to take sides. I've never been good at taking sides. I went to both BYU and Utah. I mean, I cheer for both teams. I'm not good at taking sides. And so when people ask me, I have voted for Democrats and Republicans, I struggle with taking sides. And so if that makes me wishy-washy, then I suppose I am, but I'm more of a person who just wants to care. And that's where I come from. That's how I approach the news, and that's how I feel about the listeners. And if you're not being served, I'm not doing my job. That's my focus every day.
This piggybacks on something that Tim said. You know how sometimes you're reading a book or whatever, and just something jumps off the page at you. I was reading the history of Katharine Graham, who is the owner of the Washington Post. Her husband, Phil Graham, one time was being criticized by the National Press Association for some of the inaccuracies that they had in the paper. And he was speaking before that group, and he said, I acknowledge that. I acknowledge that occasionally we get it wrong. I hope, too, that we don't just bury it on page, C14 that we made an error. We really strive to make it right. And he said, but I would ask you to remember that in our business, we're writing the first rough draft of history. And I thought, boy, if a newspaper with all of the editing that goes on, looking over the shoulders, setting the print, doing the type, everything else, and of course, the newspaper business has changed dramatically. But boy, if they're the first rough draft of history, sometimes on radio, I think we're the real quick notes on history. And we're trying to get the information out as fast as we can, as accurately as we can. Inevitably, we'll make some errors or be fed some information that isn't 100% accurate. But I'll tell you, I've never seen a radio station that tries harder to get to the truth and get the information out accurately than KSL. And, we've thanked our listeners, our colleagues. It's been a joy and honor to work with you. I'm the only person that really doesn't have a full-time job anymore. These guys work really hard every day. But, another unsung hero is our ownership. And this is going to sound like I'm sucking up, but how many radio stations around the country have had the same ownership fundamentally from day one and have had the same mission from day one, have offered the kind of stability to staff and programming and the community that I can't think of another radio station that fits into that category. So,
Well,
how
and
many times?
not just that, Doug, but they have allowed us to have careers here.
That's
And
right.
that also is unusual in this industry. I was just doing the math, and it's not exactly accurate, but the four of us sitting in this circle are almost 150 years of career. Which is crazy to think about. It's
Not only 145 of that. So,
And every day's been an honor. Let me just say that.
Yes.
yeah, it really is true. And all of us have been in this situation. I remember when they built the new broadcast house, which now is decades old. I remember dignitaries coming in from CBS and from all over the place. And we had people like Dan Rather and Frank Stanton. I mean, legendary Frank Stanton, others. And they walked through our facilities and they went, holy cow, this is beautiful. And, it's wonderful to have the tools. We probably ought to wrap this up. And again, I can't underscore how much I love these guys that are on the screen with me right here.
Oh, coming back
We
at
love
you.
you.
Just an
Can't
honor to
underscore how
work with you
grateful.
all.
When you
We
talk
are.
about walking in these halls with legendary broadcasters, you should know you were one of those guys when I made my first walk.
You, Doug.
Hey, thanks, everybody. And
Thank you, Doug.
happy 100th birthday
Yay!
tomorrow. You might be watching this at another time. Today is May 5th as we do this streaming, but tomorrow it's a big, big day. And one thing we need to underscore, tomorrow, even though it's our birthday and even though we pulled out all the stops for a big blowout throughout the day, we're going to be covering the news tomorrow afternoon. A very, very wonderfully sad event is happening, and that's the funeral of Senator Orrin Hatch, just a legendary politician nationally, internationally. And of course, KSL's primary mission here is not to pat ourselves on the back or have a lot of cake and a lot of celebration. It's to bring you the news. So tomorrow we will carry that funeral live, but we'll be celebrating in all of the little vacancies that we have throughout the day. Guys, thanks so much.
Grateful for all of you. Grateful for our
You
listeners.
too, Maria. You too.